So good afternoon, everybody from Dublin in Ireland. And I know we have a few people who are here. One of our speakers who's just down the road from me, as they say here. So that's always comforting on the north side of Dublin. My name is Jean Quinn. I am a daughter of wisdom and the executive director of Unanima International. So I'd like to welcome all of you to the 59th session of the Commission on Social Development and our side event on migration, displacement, and cross-cutting issues in the context of digital technology and just transitions. In this issue, we also want to provide links between the priority themes from the last few years at the Commission, particularly last year between the priority theme for social protection and homelessness. And here in Unanima International, we are trying to keep a focus on women, children, and girls as those hidden homeless. Of course, we couldn't do anything by ourselves, and we want to warmly welcome our co-sponsors for today's event. And that is the NGO Committee on Migration, the NGO Committee on Social Development, the Working Group to End Homelessness, the Justice Coalition of Religious, JCOR, the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, the International Presentation Association, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocesan Council of North and South America, the Society of the Sacred Heart, the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary Loreto, the Sisters of Mercy, Mercy International, Seroptimist International, the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur, Sophia in Ireland, the Sisters of Charity Federation, and all of us on this line who are committed to the whole area of homelessness and displacement. You're all most welcome. And I very happily hand over now to our moderator, Cecily Kern from Mercy International.
Thanks so much, Jean, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. Just some brief housekeeping. Please keep your microphones muted and use the raise hand function if you'd like to take the floor during the event. We have a very full agenda today, and while we hope that there will be time for discussion at the end, we hope that you'll put your questions in the chat box as you think of them, and we'll do our best to address them. We hope to share a recording of this event once it's finished. So if you'd like to speak but wish to have your input cut from the final footage, please let us know in the chat box or before your intervention. For displaced people, migrants, refugees, IDPs, and people who have experienced trafficking or homelessness, new technologies can transform and empower by optimizing information and data sharing and processing, improving trust, accessibility, and usage of migration-related services, reducing the cost of migrant recruitment, immigration, visa, and permit procedures and remittances, increasing financial inclusion and advancing innovations and enhancing livelihoods, improving access to welfare services, and protecting and supporting undocumented and vulnerable migrants. And because of this, and for many other reasons, access to technology should be treated as a human right regardless of migratory status. But in addition to purposefully using technology to provide beneficial services and opportunities to people on the move, it's equally important to proactively mitigate technological risks. Technology can be used by governments and other operators as subterfuge for collecting personal and group information, censorship, undue control, and other acts that undermine rights to privacy of displaced people. Tech platforms can also be used to steal financial and identity details and for online exploitation, extortion, blackmail, harassment, and trolling. And in the age of social media, it's common for migrants and displaced persons to suffer from unfair negative perceptions and xenophobia. And these arise from deliberate onslaughts of negative propaganda and falsehoods and institutionalized misperceptions and bias to the detriment of people's safety and welfare. Tech platforms can play key roles in monitoring and documenting cases of human trafficking and other violations of human rights, and in promoting fair, positive, and empathetic perceptions of migrants and displaced people, thus contributing to their safety integration and social cohesion. So in practice, technology can be a double-edged sword. It's neither neutral, nor is it necessarily always a good thing. And as such, it should be seen as a tool rather than a panacea, and can be used with alertness, positive purposefulness, and the necessary checks and balances from diverse stakeholders. This includes designing, implementing, and monitoring policies with the inputs of those who are impacted. As it's commonly said in these circles, don't talk about us without us. So today we'll hear from 6 speakers who will each speak from different perspectives on the cross-cutting issues related to migration, displacement, and technology. Our first speaker is Carrie van Haas, who has worked on the global migration portfolio of UN Women for the last 8 years. Currently, as the regional coordinator for the German-funded Making Migration Safe for Women project, she leads on the implementation of this project in Niger and at the global level. Previously, she worked as the policy specialist on gender and migration for UN Women in Geneva, servicing the expert working group on addressing women's human rights in the Global Compact for Migration. And as program analyst for UN Women in New York, Carrie managed the implementation and finalization of a joint European Union UN Women program on promoting and protecting migrant women workers, labor, and human rights. Carrie holds a master's degree in gender development and globalization from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and she'll be speaking on migration in the context of the Commission's theme. So, Carrie, thank you so much for being here with us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and also thank you to the organizers for inviting UN Women to speak during today's very important side event. I would like to focus my intervention on the importance of including migrant women in just transitions to sustainable development and the role of the digital technology to support their advancement and well-being. Let me begin by highlighting that nearly half of the 281 million international migrants are women, and that migration is unequivocally a gender equality issue. This is because every aspect of migration is influenced by gender, from the reasons for migrating, the information received before leaving, the journeys embarked on, to the integration in the country of destination, the work performed, and the challenges faced. While migration can be a positive experience leading to a better life and enhancing livelihood opportunities, autonomy, and agency, migrant women continue to face greater risks of discrimination and human rights violations because too often laws, policies, and practices reproduce or reinforce existing gender and race inequalities in countries of origin, transit, and destination. In order to achieve a socially just transition towards sustainable development, it is critical to include all women, including migrant women. This requires understanding the specific experiences, needs, and challenges of women in migration, and developing and implementing gender-responsive policies and practices, as well as promoting their leadership and participation in all decision-making processes. In addition, to facilitate a socially just transition, gender-responsive and inclusive social protection systems are essential in order to protect everyone, including migrant women, from economic, social, and environmental risks by ensuring job and income security over the life cycle. This requires that coverage of social protection policies are extended to national and migrant workers in all forms of employment, including those working in the informal economy and those who have irregular migration status. This is particularly important for migrant women who often lack access to decent work and social protection, predominantly performing informal workers. Digital technologies can support the inclusion of migrant women in a socially just transition by facilitating the full and equal participation in all areas of life and by ensuring the access to quality education, healthcare, decent work, and social protection. However, given the digital gender gap, which in terms of internet access ranges from 3% in developed countries to 43% in least developed countries, women are less likely to have access to the internet, digital platforms, and mobile phones compared to men and boys. For migrant women and girls, this increases their vulnerability to a wide range of rights violations, including sexual and gender-based violence at all stages of migration. A concerted effort, including via revising exclusionary policies and systems, needs to be made to ensure that all women, including migrant women, have access to modern technologies. In the context of migration, access to digital technologies can be a real game changer for women. Let me give you some concrete examples of how digital technologies can help women to have a better migration experience. Digital technologies can empower women and girls with information about safe and regular migration, as well as the risks of irregular migration, smuggling, and trafficking in persons, and how to access services and assistance prior to their departure, en route, and upon arrival. In terms of health, new digital innovations such as telehealth, offering the direct provision of healthcare through mobile devices, can enable migrant women who often struggle to access health services to get medical care. In terms of career advancement, e-learning can play a significant role in improving migrant women's and girls' access to skills and qualifications and improve their job prospects later on. Digital innovations can also play a critical role in enabling migrant women to access digital financial services and remittance platforms so that they can send and receive funds irrespective of their location at limited cost. However, migrant women, while making up half of all the global remittance senders, continue to face gender-specific barriers in sending remittances due to their relative lack of digital literacy and access to digital technologies compared to men. As a result, they often pay 20% more in remittance fees and are more dependent on in-person cash transfer services that can be riskier and more expensive than online options. So, to ensure the digital inclusion of migrant women, they need access to affordable digital technologies, skills how to use them via digital literacy trainings, and awareness of the benefits of these technologies. In conclusion, I'd like to reiterate again the urgency of including migrant women in socially just transitions to ensure that they are not left behind. To understand the specific situations of vulnerability and marginalization, but also their contributions to the socioeconomic growth of countries of origin, destination, and return. And secondly, we need to develop and implement gender-responsive policies, programs, and services, also in the context of digital technologies, that address the distinct needs, challenges, and priorities, and protect the rights at all stages of migration. And finally, we need to promote the agency, participation, and leadership of migrant women and migrant women's organizations in all spheres of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nkiri, for sharing the insights of UN Women on the importance of human rights-based, gender-responsive social protection and digital inclusion policies in this context. I want to be respectful of our tight agenda, so I will quickly move on to our next speaker, but thank you so much again. Our next speaker is Chioma Agwebo. Chioma's interests revolve around women, media, politics, and technology. As executive director of TechHerNG, she applies tech solutions towards societal problems, especially as they affect women. Whether it's chaperoning young first-time women politicians, co-creating solutions for gender and sexual violence, or curating sessions on digital security, Chioma believes that technology not applied is not useful. Her foray into advocacy began with the Light Up Nigeria movement in 2008, and since then she's functioned in leadership teams for campaigns such as Enough is Enough, Gen Voices, Occupy Nigeria, Bring Back Our Girls, Not Too Young to Run, and now State of Emergency GBV. Chioma will be speaking on grassroots empowerment and advocacy. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. Chioma, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Cecile, and hello to everyone joining us from everywhere around the globe. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. I have a presentation. I imagine that the presentation titled Grassroots Empowerment. Hope post this presentation is that we all feel very empowered to be able to advocate across our communities for the things that matter. So I did a little introduction talking about key social development markers, and they are just the ways in which people develop social and emotional skills over time, but they also are variables that shape interactions within society and determine progress or regression. So for instance, around education, around health, population around social protections, around immigration. So how are people moving, what protections in place, especially for women, for vulnerable people, for people living with disabilities? All of these things fall within social development markers. And if you look at, I have a slide on my country, Nigeria, just talk about the state of homelessness. And 2 key stats saying that approximately 4 million people are homeless in Nigeria. And this is an astronomical number when you think about the fact that in Nigeria, we have about 180 million to 200 million people. You have about 20% of that, or about 10% of that, who are currently homeless, and the numbers continue to increase. And as everyone has said, whether here or elsewhere, COVID, the pandemic, has exacerbated issues across the globe. So where you had a problem, COVID just made it bigger. COVID expanded it. So what's advocacy and what's our role here, as daughters of wisdom, or as daughters just representing the various organizations that we've come from? Advocacy is a tool that helps to put problems on the public agenda, whether people like it or not. So people are advocating, and they do it in such a way that everyone has to listen. It provides a voice for the marginalized, it promotes and protects human rights, but more importantly, think of advocacy as standing in the gap. Oftentimes, you have advocates that lend their voices to causes, especially for people who can't speak for themselves. It's a no-brainer that the person who is homeless may or might not have access to the internet, might not be able to afford a meal, talk less of being able to afford the internet to advocate for themselves. And so we have really, really specific, powerful, and very important roles in ensuring that voices are heard, people's rights are protected and promoted, people have their views and opinions factored into decisions taken, and these decisions will have some sort of effect on them, that people have their grievances acknowledged and remediated. And finally, sometimes you need to advocate to change a practice, right? So for instance, I'm going to think of a harmful practice in Nigeria. There's one of them in which women and girls will be giving out as payment for loans taken by men. And this is a harmful practice, and it's great to hear someone from UN Women, because under Spotlight Initiative in Nigeria, communities and civil society organizations have lobbied their councils of their chiefs, have lobbied their traditional rulers, and that particular practice has been abolished. So advocacy is powerful in ensuring that people lead protected lives, and ensuring that people lead safe lives. And I'm hoping that at the end of this, we will be able to advocate within our communities on migration, on homelessness, and on various things that matter to us. So misconceptions around advocacy. Advocacy is not all about politics. It is not lobbying, and it is not solely fundraising. Sometimes fundraising can be a part of advocacy because you need to be able to fund what you're doing, but it is not fundraising alone. It is not just donating to charity alone. Now, how do we hold government to account? We need to first be aware of our rights and responsibilities as members of society. So what are the rules that apply in your country? You're unable to advocate for something that's not provided by law, right? Now, if it's not provided by law, your advocacy should work on ensuring that it then becomes provided by law, but you cannot ask your government to give you something that is not provided for. What I need to note is you have to be aware, right? And you need to be involved in the processes that bring about a change in leadership. So you need to form groups, you need to advocate within these groups. You first need to get people to understand what you'll be advocating for. A lot of times, people run on emotion, and there's not enough knowledge about the issue that should be advocated about. And so these issues are not sustainable, right? They don't last, because after the initial buzz, after the initial press, there's no substance for people to stand on. So persistent advocacy, making your voices heard until change occurs, involves a complete understanding of the issues around what you're advocating for. I have a few examples of some advocacy efforts across the world, just for you to see that regardless of where you are, regardless of where you joined us from today, there might be an issue in your community, and no one is too small, no one is too great to take up an issue and to advocate for it. So for instance, in Nigeria in 2014, we had the Bring Up Our Girls campaign. This particular example, because this campaign kind of reverberated across the world. In Asia, Hong Kong's anti-extradition campaign started in June of 2019. In Australia, the 2010 Melbourne Live Music Rally. In Europe, the December 2020 Anti-Global Security Bill protest in France. In South America, the November 2019 protest over election irregularities. Advocacy campaigns can take any form, they can assume various formats. A few things. They can be locality, the country, the region, or globally. They can be time bound. For instance, you want to advocate within a specific frame of time for your government or your parliament to do something. They can be issue based, or they are issue based, so they can cover one or a range of issues. For instance, the Lights Initiative, it focuses on eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls. Now, this violence can occur in a number of ways. It can occur via FGM, occur via harmful practices, via sexual and gender-based violence. So it could be issue-based, covering one or a range of issues, from abolition to reform to introduction, whatever it is. It's also target-based, right? So government, business, groups, individuals, and you have various channels. You can be advocating to citizens to join you to advocate to government, or you can have direct dealings with policymakers, grassroots lobbying, mobilizing the public, or via networks and coalitions. The five talks about the burning issue in your mind, really know how. And I like to speak on panels where I give and implement in there, not just listen to a fancy presentation and keep stuff moving. So the first thing is to understand and how it affects what you want to advocate for. It helps you target your advocacy and also stops government from having a cop-out so that they don't try to correct what you're saying as opposed to doing what you're asking for. The second thing is to build a network, right? There's a scripture I like that says, a threefold cord is not easily broken. So build a network, find others who share the same passions with you, collaborate, and get people who will focus on media, get other people who will focus on educating the public or grassroots, get people who will do various things within your campaign. Set clear goals and expectations. What does a win look like? Is it the government inviting you to the table? Is it the government changing a policy? Is it remediation for a wrong is it the promulgation of new laws? Set goals, set expectations, but also set internal principles for engagement. Look at other advocacy efforts. What made them fail? In Nigeria, one of the things that makes advocacy efforts fail is that the groups get divided and people start to receive money from politicians. So set up internal principles that say, for instance, we won't visit politicians without enough people to form a quorum and thwart any untoward behavior. You can also say you want to be sure that every meeting is documented so that there's a trail of events and so that you're able to really speak to the matters that you care about. The other thing to say is communicate in clear, cohesive language. Not everyone is as educated as you are, and you must assume that you are speaking to the least educated person. This helps you to keep your language as simple, as concise, and as cohesive as possible. I've talked about documenting the movement. It's important to write, especially as women. We often get written out of movement or our efforts are downplayed. So it's important to document what people have done, what the status quo was, what you've done, and then what the final result is. The final thing is stay on course. Not every advocacy movement will be successful or will yield the successes that you have asked for, but it's important to ask and to stop, to never stop speaking, but also to keep focused on your advocacy points. Final thing, no voice is too soft when that voice speaks to others. I'm really excited to see everyone today because your presence at this gathering means that there's something in your heart that you want to speak about, and I wish you the very best of it. Thank you very much.
Chioma, thank you so much for sharing that really powerful and practical advice on and insight on the importance of access to digital technology, not just for social protection policies and social development, but really critically for grassroots empowerment and ensuring that people can participate in decision-making and effective advocacy and making sure that they can claim their rights. Our next speaker is Dr. Monica Duong, who in 2014 founded Here Colors, an organization whose mission is to promote digital accessibility in Mexico and Latin America. She specializes in areas of digital inclusion, including digital platforms, content, and ICT policies for vulnerable groups. As an expert of the International Telecommunications Union on issues of digital inclusion, Monica has participated in the development of digital inclusion policy and trainings for officials in countries such as Costa Rica, Guyana, Guatemala, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Egypt, the Gambia, and Burkina Faso. This year, Monica contributed to the publication of the book UX in Latino America, where she wrote the chapter on accessible websites. With the accelerated digital transformation, she advocates for a cooperative approach to ensure the necessary digital abilities to participate in the information society, as well as the inclusion of the digital platforms and digital content to leave no one behind. And she'll speak on the role of digital technologies on social development. Dr. Duam, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Unanima, to organize this site event and to invite me to have the opportunity to talk about accessibility and digital inclusion. After what we lived in the past year with the COVID-19 pandemic, we were all using profusely technology. We were obliged to start doing all of our activities through digital platforms. Like today, we're not being able to be together in New York. So we are all talking about our matters in hand through digital platforms. As a result, 51% less customers in food and pharmacy venues, which are essential goods, minus 75% of customers in non-essential product stores. What that is because we were, with the confinement, obliged to do all our activities through digital platforms. This is important because now we are not using technology to enhance productivity, to enhance social interactions, but we are using digital platforms to interact in the main activities of the economic life. So now it is very important, and more important than ever, that we work together in order to ensure that no one is left behind in this digital accelerated digital transformation. So what do we need in order to ensure that everyone has access to telecommunications and digital platforms? One, of course, is connectivity. We just heard about Nigeria, but I had the opportunity to work in Latin America as well, in Africa. And if we do not have internet, we cannot use ICTs. We cannot use the mobile phones. You cannot use those applications that will help us as migrants, as vulnerable groups, to interact in this digital economy. So first of all, we need connectivity. Second of all, we need affordability. Devices are very expensive. So in our countries, if we want to participate in the digital economy, we need to have devices are affordable, devices that everyone can use. And this is the first bias that we can find, because normally, due to the cost of the devices, there were gender bias in the appropriation of technology, because only the men are the owners of the smartphone or the computer or the tablet in the household. So affordability is very important. Then we have accessibility. Accessibility, persons with disability, the elderly, all of us that now are obliged to participate using technological platforms, these platforms need to be accessible. If I'm a blind user, if I'm hard of hearing, if I have an elderly condition, we need to have accessible platforms, accessible communication. And what do I mean by accessible? For instance, Zoom platform, a few months ago, habilitated the closed captioning option. So if I'm a deaf person participating in a meeting, I'm able to participate in equal conditions because I can habilitate the voice to text closed captioning option. It's not the best, but at least it's some kind of feature that we need in all the ICTs in order to make them inclusive and everyone can use them. And finally, we need to work on the appropriation. We talked about how application can help in the financial inclusion. We talked about how application can help in mobility. We know that mobile apps can help in social loneliness because we can participate and we can see our loved ones through social media. In order to be able to get all those results, we need appropriation. And still, there's a lot of people that do not have and are not using ICTs. And when we talk about digital inclusion, who do we are talking about? We're talking about 2 billion older adults and growing, because we are in 2050, for the first time in human history, there will be more adults older than 50 years old in the planet. So we're talking about all of us that are getting old and then are losing our dexterities and will still need to work online. We have been in Latin America, we had this huge problem because with the pandemic, the older population weren't able to go to the bank to get money to buy their basic needs, and they were obliged to work on digital platforms and on the mobile app of the financial institution, and they were not used to it. So they created a barrier and really stressed the population. Also, the World Health Organization published last year a very interesting document on how 1 billion younger adults, less than 25 years, are at risk of losing their hearing because of the use of headphones at volumes that are not safe. So we're talking that in 20 years, 1 billion younger adults will have a hearing disability. So TikTok, YouTube, all those platforms that have content, video content, won't be able to be consumed by the younger if all these contents are not accessible. 250 more men than women are using the internet. So there's a gender gap. 250 more men are able to enhance their productivity, to communicate, to buy today in this new economy through digital platforms, and women aren't able to do that. And this is creating also a gender problem. 33 million migrants under the age of 20 uses the digital platforms to communicate, to have information. So when we're talking about digital inclusion, we're talking about half the world population. Half the world population need technology that is inclusive, need technology that is easy to understand, need technology that is safe. So I would like to invite you to a call to action. We need to adapt to the new normal. The economic of social distancing is here to stay. Half of the work now, the labor opportunities are going to be from home. And how am I going to be able to participate in this new economy if the platforms are not inclusive and not accessible? The habits and regulation based on reduced physical contact are also here to stay. And these have a very important impact on vulnerable groups. If we cannot eat, work, shop, exercise, and manage in the same manner that everyone else because the platforms are not accessible, we are creating a very big digital divide. So what needs to be done? We need to review the public policies to ensure access to information communities for all. So we were talking earlier that it's a human right, and it's more clear than ever. If I cannot buy online, I'm being excluded. If I cannot communicate, I'm being excluded. So yes, if the technology today is a new normal, it is a human right, and we need to revise our policies in order to ensure that everyone has access. And by access, I was talking about the 4 pillars: connectivity, appropriation, accessibility, and affordability. If we do not work on those in those 4 lines, we are not going to be able to have social inclusion. Create alliances to guarantee minimum digital abilities. We were talking about migrants, we were talking about the homeless, we were talking about women, we were talking about the elderly. We need to create alliances to ensure that they have the minimum digital abilities. Today, minimum digital abilities to being able to have an email, to being able to use a social network, to being able to understand an interaction, to buy online. Those are today the minimum digital abilities that every one of us need to have. We need to review policies to ensure data protection, privacy, and cyber accountability. Part of the risk and of the disincentive of all of us and vulnerable groups to use the internet is because we're never sure about our privacy. We're never sure about what's going to be used on data protection. And we need to review those policies because today technological companies have too much information about all of us, and we are vulnerable on this. So we need to retake control of those policies, and we need to review them in order to make them safe for everyone. We also need to create alliances to develop public policies to ensure the affordability information as well as the internet. It doesn't matter that we live in a digital economy if internet is not affordable, or internet does not have a good speed, or I cannot buy a device. On affordability, we've seen in many of the rural areas that we have communities that are having a couple of computers so everyone in the community can use it. And I support those kinds of efforts, but we need to ensure that every community have access to a device in order to be able to use the technologies. And also, we need to create alliances to disseminate training on how to create accessible technologies. Today, in your mobile, in your smartphone, in your computer, you do have accessibility features. You do have screen readers able to can be used by blind persons as well as by persons that cannot read. You do have the facility of closed captioning. You do have a lot of, you can change the contrast of the colors of your screen so you can participate in equal basis. And it's so important that these accessibility guidelines, these accessibility standards are disseminated so everyone is creating accessible technology. So policies and governments need to work with the technology, to the tech development, to the tech guys, in order to make them develop accessible technologies. We are adapting to technology, and technology should adapt to our needs. We cannot adapt to, we are all adapting to the needs, and we are all using the technology as it's sold to us. But we need to work together in order to make technology to serve our needs, and we do not need to adapt to them, because today the digital divide is bigger. Today, the exclusion of more people in the economy it's a reality. And in the future, if this is the new reality with less human interaction and more use of technology, we really need to work together to create policies that ensures the human right and the human participation of all, no matter our characteristics, no matter our gender, no matter our age. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica, for sharing your expertise on the conditions that have to be fulfilled to make sure that digital technologies can be positive tools for inclusion and social development, for highlighting specific concerns that impact specific groups, and for sharing really practical recommendations and a call to action for us to work together to advance a more human rights-based and inclusive approach. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Ife Ofong, who started her career as a lecturer at the University of Jos, Nigeria. She then progressed to the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Nigeria, where she held various positions, including senior lecturer, head of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, senior research fellow, and course coordinator at the Institute for Development Studies. And currently she is the National Coordinator of Women in Development and Environment, and she is very committed to empowering women to participate in decision-making and governance. Her work has spread across many civil society committees and organizations, including the NGO Committee on Social Development, the Working Group to End Homelessness, and the Global Coalition on Social Protection Floors. She's also a board member of Habitat International Coalition and a member of the steering committee of African Network of Women's Shelters, where she's working with other civil society groups to end violence against women and girls and provide safe spaces and shelters for women survivors of violence and abuse. Dr. Ife is a member of the UN Expert Group for the 59th session of the Commission on Social Development, and will speak today on addressing the needs of vulnerable people, especially women, children, and girls related to digital inclusion. So Dr. Ife, welcome, and you have the floor. Dr. Ife, we can't hear you.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, Celine. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Wow. So what's going on? Oh my God. Okay. Wow. Okay. My presentation, will be focusing basically on digital inclusion and the needs of vulnerable persons. I'll be highlighting the gaps, priority areas for intervention, although the previous speakers have touched on these issues. I also want to talk briefly about what COVID-19 has done, to us as a people, and as a nation. COVID-19 has further demonstrated the critical role of digital technologies, in protecting the well-being of people, from fighting the spread of virus to sustaining daily life, as well as keeping people socially connected. It has also deepened, the already divide, the unequal access and affordability of digital infrastructure between and within countries, between the urban and rural areas, the poor, the rich, and even between men and women, boys and girls. Because of time, I just want to, jump straight to the next slide. A lot has been said about migration, but I want to say that migration dates as back as, as old as human beings are on Earth. People migrate for various reasons. So while migrants may have control over their movements, people that are displaced often do not have that control because they are forced out due to circumstances beyond their control. For instance, those that are forcefully evicted, they leave their abode and move to other areas. Let's look at the case of Syria, Venezuela, Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, and so many other countries, particularly in the Middle East, where more than 70 million persons have been displaced due to war, conflict, and extremism. And these women and children, they suffer most. They live in open tents without adequate facilities. For whatever reason, like I said, why people move, they need connectivity. Connectivity is key, and digital inclusion is paramount to ensure that relationships are maintained. We need connectivity in terms of, moving ahead our economic or social activities, and even in advancing or maintaining culture and traditions wherever, we go. If no one should be left offline, it is important that we pursue digital inclusion for all, which includes both migrants, women, children, and girls. So when we talk about digital exclusion, what are we trying to say? What we're trying to say is that women, children, and girls that do not have what it takes to access and use internet are digitally excluded. We're talking about infrastructure here. In many African countries, and I think maybe in some parts of Asia, you find out that things like electricity, as basic as it is, cannot be said to be something that communities are enjoying 100%. In Africa, you find out that people can go on for weeks, days, weeks, without having electricity. So if you do not have electricity, how are you going to be able to connect to the internet? So let's look at digital exclusion of women. Yes, it is true that generally women and girls, are not too keen into computer science, mathematics, engineering, and stuff like that. Yes, it's been said that women, use the internet less than men. That men actually have more access to the internet. Again, you cannot ignore the fact, that those of us who come from Africa, the culture of our, of our countries make it in such a way that many women do not even bother, to go to the internet. So digital technologies, in addition, can help women. Yes, we know that, to access new markets, interact with customers, and increase their finances. But the truth of the matter is that, do they really have what it takes to get into the internet? We have digital exclusion of girls. Again, it's been said over and over that about 45% of internet users worldwide are youths, okay? And that many more youths, like 2 billion young potential users who should actually be on the internet or use internet, are not using internet. But interestingly, over 50% of those young potential users are women, are girls. So why is this so? We know that in some developing countries, many girls are either not in school or did not finish education due to poverty or the culture of early marriage. So when this is the situation, how would they be able to access the internet? How would they be able, to get into the digital age or to make use of the digital technology? Now we talk about the digital exclusion of children. Unicef, in one of the tweets, said that internet holds a wealth of opportunity, yet half the world's population has no online access, including 360 million young people. UNICEF also said that when you connect a generation to the internet, you have connected them to unlimited opportunities. So the digital exclusion of children is a very common feature in many developing countries. Look at the reality on ground. These are schools in Africa and even in some parts of Asia. These children, they are there without shelter, without electricity, without, technology. How are they going to learn? Due to COVID-19, a lot of schools are supposed to be learning online. How can these ones learn online? So this is what actually it should be. Children should study under an environment which is very, very conducive. ICT must be a must in schools. So I've been able to look at some of the gaps, in terms of digital inclusion for these persons. The first one, like I've already said, is digital access and infrastructure. I said, that a lot of African countries do not even have electricity. So how do they begin to access the internet? So when one does not have access to infrastructure, how do you get onto the internet? The second point here is affordability of digital technologies. Many families, women and children, live in poverty in Africa and some parts of Asia. So when they are struggling to find food for themselves, how can they be able to afford smartphones, computers, laptops? You and I know that it is very, very difficult. Yes, a few women have managed to buy cheap phones, but they can't afford the mobile data or to connect to broadband or Wi-Fi or to be able to, connect to other technology facilities, that people in advanced countries or developed countries are able to connect to. Now, the other issue here is digital skills and literacy. One needs skills and literacy to be able to operate some of these tech devices. So let's look at the case in Africa and some parts of Asia where they have low literacy rate. Girls do not finish school, some drop out of school, and the schools themselves don't even teach these skills that will enable girls and children to get the training or to know how to be able to access the internet. These are issues. Now, yes, it is true that some girls or some women may be able to acquired the digital skill or access and or can even afford to own these digital devices, but they're not willing because they lack understanding, they lack the social acceptance to engage in ICT. In addition, the content and services that women and girls want to use may actually not be designed in a way that works for them. Now, I've been able to put down here some policy recommendations, which I think we really need to look at. In general, policies aiming for digital inclusion must provide universal access and secure access to digital technology for all. Such policies will help women and girls complement their social skills with training and contribute to digital technological spaces so that technological innovations will be designed with their needs in mind. We're talking about policies that will ensure that all schools are connected to the internet and with each other via ICT tools, which are important means for getting the children on board. Policies that will increase funding for investment in ICT infrastructure, education, training, and access to digital technologies, particularly in remote and rural areas, through the establishment of community information and computer centers with full internet services. So the point here is that we already know that there's poverty, particularly in the rural areas. They're not able to, to find enough food for themselves and their family, and so they're not able to buy the infrastructure they need for ICT. So there should be deliberate policies that would provide these facilities for them in the rural areas. This will ensure that everyone leverages the benefits of digital technology and that we leave no one behind, or better still, leave no woman, girl, or child behind. In conclusion, I want us to, first of all, understand that lack of access to digital technology is a source of inequality and injustice. Therefore, we need to close the digital gaps and ensure that no one is left behind, particularly these vulnerable persons. There should be a clear and cohesive understanding of what digital inclusion will look like, a roadmap on how to get there, measures and supporting data to show progress and the milestones achieved. We also need to set key priorities and know where the gaps are, so interventions can be directed to where it is needed. Policies and initiatives that support individuals and communities to become digitally included should be encouraged. Finally, let me emphasize the importance of having agreed measures for digital inclusion, as well as reliable, comprehensive data that will provide a full picture of who is or who is not digitally included. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Iffy, for so generously sharing your insights with us on digital exclusion and how to address the needs of the most marginalized with respect to digital access and inclusion. And as one of our participants in the chat has echoed, how can you connect if you don't have access? In many places, people have to travel long distances to even access digital infrastructure. So thank you for highlighting these issues and for suggesting policy recommendations. Our next speaker is Dr. Preeti Gadhok, who is an associate professor in the College of Pharmacy and Health Services at St. John's University, New York. She earned her PhD in international health as a Summer Dean's doctoral scholar from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, an MPH in health policy and management from Emory University Rollins School of Public Health, and a BA in biology and sociology anthropology at Knox College. She's a senior fellow at the Vincentian Center for Church and Society and teaches graduate and undergraduate public health courses. Dr. Gadhok engages in interdisciplinary, collaborative, and community-driven research to inform culturally sensitive programs and policies at the nexus of food security, nutrition, chronic disease prevention, and health equity in marginalized populations. She will be bringing a public health perspective to our discussion. Dr. Gadhook, thank you so much for being with us. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Cecily, and thank you, everybody. Good morning. It's an honor to be here on this really phenomenal panel. I thank Jean and Unanima for this invitation. So, as Cecily mentioned, I'll be speaking about the public health aspect, and all the speakers have given really quite phenomenal policy recommendations and really a great broad sweeping overview of all the important issues here. So I'll just highlight the public health aspects by talking a little bit about the statistics of forcibly displaced persons, which we all know well about. About the root causes is what we speak about in public health, or the social determinants of health that have already been discussed, like housing and income and employment. Thinking about cross-cutting health needs of displaced populations, and really highlighting that the SDGs, while they are very helpful, and in the last talk that we discussed on homelessness, that they are a useful map, they are not sufficiently addressing displacement directly. So the call to action for the SDGs is really to address the cross-cutting needs of these special populations. So first of all, 1% of the world is displaced, and as the speakers previously mentioned, that this number is sure to rise and is on the rise because of COVID pandemic. We certainly still don't have all of the data on the extent to which COVID has affected our populations, but we do know that everything is worsening, from food insecurity to access to healthcare, and certainly the number 79.5 million displaced in the world at the end of 2019 is certainly on the rise. This slide here is certainly highlighting the overarching point of this talk, which is that we need to target all the social determinants of health of our migrant populations, of our displaced populations, including populations who are in transition into poverty, out of poverty, into being migrants, finding work, losing it, and sort of all of the transient populations as well that are not being captured in the data. So social determinants of health are conditions in which we live, work, play, go to school, worship, and sleep, eat. So conditions surrounding migration often fuel health inequities and may expose migrants to increased health risks and negative health outcomes that we've been speaking about, but really looking at on the right-hand side, thinking from a really structural perspective, we certainly know that, as the previous speakers have mentioned, such as Dr. Iffy, that we certainly need policies in place, right? These are global policies from the perspective of SDGs, national policies to protect our populations, but also to monitor and survey the populations and provide them with necessary resources. So it really begins with the political will. Then community and social factors, we certainly also need to target other cultural aspects of stigma, discrimination, and social inclusion. Work conditions for migrants, as hard as it is to find jobs when you are in transition. So thinking about a living wage, and then living conditions themselves in terms of access to clean water and safe housing, lifestyle factors, thinking about from the perspective of digital technologies, what are the linguistic barriers, and ensuring that when you do provide digital access, that it is in the local languages, it's in the tribal languages necessary. So that really certainly means that individual factors are also necessary. And in terms of healthcare itself, in terms of sort of all of these aspects of the social ecology of migration, we really need to think about digital access across the spectrum in the communities, in society, at the workplace, in the healthcare sector, and in households for elders, for children, for women. These are some of the cross-cutting issues of the social determinants of health. And again, the speakers have done a wonderful job of addressing many of these. So access was mentioned in the previous talk. So access to digital technology is really critical. Availability and affordability of digital technology is really critical because we are discussing a population that is working and living and existing in poor conditions. We need to think about the families themselves as units, and how can we apply digital technologies to be more inclusive rather than what they live with is often social exclusion. They often live with xenophobia and discrimination because there is a lot of cross-border migration occurring. So those are really important issues, and I think those messages could be really powerfully conveyed through digital technologies, through public health interventions. Both in terms of the host countries and organizations and communities, but also in terms of alleviating these stigmas that these communities face. And certainly in terms of social community influences, thinking about schools, as the previous speaker spoke, very important. Without education, without giving access early in life to a child, you're really not empowering them. So empowerment does begin from childhood. These are sort of overarching SDGs that are indirectly and somewhat directly affecting issues of displacement. And while there are several, such as poverty, good health and well-being, and 10, reduce inequalities, we still don't have an SDG for special populations. So there's a difference in discussing sort of bringing down inequalities versus specifically targeting vulnerable populations. Here is a further sort of in-depth analysis of social determinants of migration and thinking more deeply about the transition and the transient stages themselves. How can we address their needs of transportation, for instance, through digital technologies? How can we affect the ease by which or reduce the difficulty of transportation? Thinking about addressing other important aspects of health, such as addressing sexual violence and other types of violence and injuries that certainly are much higher in populations who are migrants and displaced. How do we protect them? How does the local healthcare, local clinics, how do they protect them, especially across the travels that they're taking place? In terms of the place of destination themselves, thinking about legality status. So in order to really gain access to digital technology, you really must give some sense of visibility to the population. So that's very important. How do we ensure that they're visible in the local communities, how they're part of the local society, and adjusting services necessary for the migrant populations and the displaced population, as well as thinking about return, the level of services, the healthcare services that you provide. So, all of this cycle really does need to be reflected in the digital technology, and we can empower and provide infrastructure to the local healthcare systems in order to do that. And finally, my call to action here, just in the vein of all this, the speakers, is really together with our partners, with our NGOs, CBOs, the academy, we really need to be able to support these member states and to address migration at this triad of climate change, thinking about access to food. We need to think about health in terms of addressing their immediate and long-term health needs for malnutrition, infectious diseases, mental health, and now certainly COVID, which is, as the speaker mentioned earlier, here to stay, which has changed our really ability in terms of social distancing, and then migration itself, the population, whether it's voluntary or forced. And so some aspects to think about in terms of public health perspective is creating and enabling a social and built environment for sustainable reintegration of these populations, to have development plans, national SDG, national, international SDGs plans to harness these positive contributions for migrant populations. And we really cannot achieve SDGs without investing in infrastructure, as a speaker previously mentioned. And that's, again, across the social determinants, across institutions. We must have political will. As the speakers mentioned, advocacy is key, and that's why we're all here, to advocate for greater visibility for the migrant population. Issues of connectivity, local infrastructure, I can certainly dovetail that to say that that's important for our local clinics, for those pop-up clinics for refugees that exist. So we need to ensure, especially in the rural areas, because the majority of this is in the rural areas, to really increase that capacity. So capacity building is very important. And certainly, as always, surveillance data is very important, because without data, we really have no view or lens through which to look at where are the great needs, where are we making improvements, where do we still have gaps to fill. And so together, I believe that, like the panelists, I believe that we can empower these vulnerable communities and populations by placing them directly on the map of the SDGs, both on the international perspective, and then certainly translating that to national and local policies through cross-cutting and multi-sectoral policies and programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing this depth of knowledge and experience to us, for tying into the SDGs, and for sharing your insights on the cross-cutting public health impacts of migration and displacement, and the role of digital tools in creating policies for people on the move and public health interventions. I would encourage those who have questions to please put them in the chat so that speakers can take a look at them. We will have a very limited time at the end of the event. And last, but certainly not least, our final speaker brings a lived experience of both displacement and technological innovation. Suad Al-Dara is a Syrian storyteller, data scientist, and software engineer based in Dublin, Ireland. She studied and worked as a software engineer in Damascus until 2012, when she relocated to Egypt for a year before settling in Ireland and working with Fujitsu, and then at Unicef headquarters in New York. Swat holds a master's in data analytics from the National University of Ireland, Galway. Her thesis, refugeesare.info, which tackles the spreading issue of misinformation about refugees and migrants in the news, won TechFugees Global Challenges Awards 2018, was shortlisted by the European DatSci and AI Awards 2019, and won the Irish Red Cross Humanitarian Awards 2020. TechCrunch listed her as one of the 25 most innovative new projects using technology to help refugees and NGOs. Swat started the Women Tech Makers Group in Galway, a Google program to empower women in technology, and she currently volunteers with TechFugees to empower displaced people with technology. She has spoken on several occasions on her experiences, and is currently writing a book about home and identity, after she was recently longlisted for the Penguin Random House Right Now 2020 program, which supports underrepresented writers in the UK and Ireland. So we're so excited to have you with us. You have the floor.
Thanks, Cecile, and thanks everyone for joining me, and thanks, Jean, for inviting me to this talk. I guess I'll start my story, since the context of technology. I'll start my story from Syria, when I started studying software engineering back in the days, instead of accepting arranged marriage proposal, basically. So I graduated as a software engineer in 2008, and I worked as a software engineer in Syria, Damascus, until the war started in 2011. At that point, I had a job that I loved. I had friends, family. I was taking piano lessons. Life was fine at that point. I was in love. I never saw myself leaving the country, basically. I even enrolled in like first aid courses to volunteer with the Red Cross, basically to help. I did not believe in leaving. I was in love with my city and my country. I always used to write poems about that. But then by the end of 2012, things became too dangerous to stay. There was a too close explosion to my house, and it was time to leave. So my husband and I, we were just getting married, and we just left the country by the end of 2012, and we headed to Egypt. We thought we would be starting a new life there, find technology jobs related, but then unfortunately, a few months after we moved there, the country went into unrest, and the regime changed, and the regulations changed against Syrians. And one of the rules that changed, that Syrians were not allowed anymore, no more visas for Syrian. And suddenly overnight we became illegals. So we had to look for another opportunity. We started looking for jobs, applying for jobs everywhere. But later in 2013, when the chemical attack happened in Syria, that drove many Syrians out of the country. And suddenly Syrians became the burden on the world. And suddenly countries became fed up. It felt like the world was fed up with Syrians. And that's when the paper borders started coming up. And we just couldn't get anywhere. We got visa rejections from everywhere. And I think that's what drove many people. That's when the boat's journey started, because there was no legal way to go anywhere due to the paper borders. Luckily, before we were too desperate to consider a boat, I finally managed to get a job offer from Ireland. And till today, I think my degree in engineering saved my life and saved me from going through a dangerous journey, because if it wasn't for that offer, I don't know where my life would have ended. So I moved to Ireland in 2014 as a software engineer to start a job with Fujitsu. My husband couldn't join me at the beginning because also his visa was rejected. My whole life was shaped around visa. So, but luckily after 3 months, he managed to join and we started our life in Ireland. Because I understood the importance of technology, I started tech groups for women to support them and to highlight the importance of women having a degree in engineering. After that, I started getting more involved into the data behind the software and the stories behind the softwares, and how data can be used for good. I was in a conference and I heard about how Unicef was using technology and data to help people on the move and provide support, all of that using data. And I was surprised that my skills can be used for a good cause, basically. So I started volunteering with UNICEF. I started to get to know more the Tech for Good world, and I got involved with UNICEF. I got a job actually as a data scientist with them back then, and I worked in amazing projects to support emergency responses using data. After that, I decided to pursue a master's degree in data analytics with the theme of Data for Good, but I wasn't sure what my thesis would be until I was in a taxi one day and the taxi driver wanted to know where I was from. And when I said Syria, he was shocked. And then he told me, we are scared of Syrians. And I was surprised by his reaction because he told me he never met any Syrian. But then he told me, Syrians are terrorists. Don't you read the news? And that's when it hit me. What is exactly is the news saying about Syrians? I read the news, of course, but how could it that this taxi driver could imagine what Syrians are, even though he never met one before? So I decided that this is gonna be my thesis, and I wanted to explore and use data analytics in the news to be able to highlight the problem of xenophobia against refugees. And that's when my website refugeesare.info was born, basically. I wanted to see refugees are what, fill the blank, what comes after refugees when the news describe refugees. This project was a success, and one of the awards was from TechFugees. And TechFugees is an amazing organization that I volunteer with, where they use technology to empower displaced people. One of their programs is also focused on women particularly, and they believe in the importance of technology for displaced women. They offer fellowships for them, train them in technology, and give them basically a way to survive in this world instead of being a burden, of being displaced and without any hope. They give them hope through technology. They enable them to be data scientists, data analysts, software engineers, and find them jobs. And I find this program really amazing because at the end, technology saved my life, and I literally went through it. So I love to see this program grow even further because it is very important. And thank you, I guess. That's my story.
Thank you so much, Swad, for sharing your story and your inspiring work with all of us. There's just so much potential for tech and data analysis to help shift public narratives on migrants and refugees and create more evidence-based policies and inclusive ones, and to reduce xenophobia and discrimination. We've just heard the last of our speakers. There's been such a rich and insightful discussion on the role of tech as a tool to foster inclusion and belonging, and to empower migrants, refugees, and all people who have experienced displacement, trafficking, or homelessness to be agents of social, economic, and political development in their communities. Unfortunately, we are over time. So if you have questions for specific panelists, we'll be able to get you in touch with them after the event. Thank you again to our speakers and to all of you for joining us. And I'd like to invite Jean to close the event.
Thank you so much, Cecily, for your wonderful way of moderating this session and moving us on. And I must say I'm overwhelmed with the number of people that attended this side event, almost 106 people. And that's because there was such an interest in what we're trying to do in relation to migration, displacement, homelessness. But again, as it was around technology, I think many people have said about the need for connectivity, but also the need for infrastructure. We can't have one without the other, which is really important. And I think for me, the lack of internet is another layer of exclusion. I really feel that strongly, on top of all the other areas that we exclude people in. And I suppose for Unanima International and all our co-sponsors on this line, what we're asking really is affordable internet for all as a human right. And really, that's what I'm saying. And I think when Suad said what she did say, how it saved her life, that's really what we want for everybody. So I'm so grateful for everyone for attending today. And it's a busy week, so we're on to the next event at 3 o'clock. Take care and God bless. Thank you.